Bark at the Moon in particular. When I joined Ozzy, it was more of that LA feel at the time, like Dawkins, Motley Crue, turned into an Ozzy song.
Jake E. Lee, the man who once wrote Bark at the Moon and helped bring Ozzy Osbourne back to the top after Randy Rhoads' death, was never credited as a songwriter. He's not as famous as the iconic guitarists, has no bronze statue or star on the Walk of Fame, and in over 40 years of playing music, has never won a major award. But in the loud and chaotic world of heavy metal, Jake is an exception, an artist who plays through pain, lives in silence, and lets the music speak for him. He never smashed guitars on stage, never screamed in the press, never wrote a memoir to lament his fate. When Ozzy and Sharon Osbourne stripped him of songwriting credit, he signed a silence agreement. When he was fired after a casual dinner, he simply made a phone call to confirm, then hung up. And when he was shot 3 times in the back at age 67 while trying to stop a thief, Jake survived. Not by luck, but by habit, facing pain without complaint. He was once called the strange bridge between Randy Rhoads and Zakk Wylde, not just because of his place in Ozzy Osbourne's band, but because he carried the precision of his predecessor and the reckless instinct of his successor. Yet Jake's career became a string of forgotten chapters, because the audience only remembers the victors, and he never played to win. He played to survive, and to protect the one thing no one could ever steal from him: dignity. So what shaped Jake E. Lee? A silent figure yet irreplaceable? Why did the man who helped define the sound of an era disappear from the spotlight for so many years? And what has kept him playing after losing credit, losing his place, and nearly losing his life? Subscribe to the channel now and join us in uncovering the story of Jake E. Lee, the man who wrote the hits but was robbed of the glory, who fell hard but never begged to rise. Early life. Jake E. Lee was born on February 15, 1957, in Norfolk, Virginia, with the birth name Jakey Lou Williams, a name that sounded distinctly American for a boy who was never truly seen as fully American. His mother was Japanese, and his father was Welsh-American. At a time when America still harbored deep post-World War II prejudices, being a mixed-race Asian-European child in the American South was like carrying a silent sentence, stared at, called racial slurs, and excluded from what was considered normal. His family soon relocated to California, settling in the San Diego area when Jake was still a young boy. But the move did little to erase his sense of otherness, etched into his language, his features, and his identity. In school, Jake was often mocked for looking different. His narrow eyes, yellow-toned skin, and thick black hair. He didn't quite belong anywhere, not American enough to be accepted, nor Japanese enough to fully grasp his mother's roots. That in-betweenness became a shell, silent, withdrawn, and open only to one thing: the keys of a piano. His mother was a strict woman, deeply disciplined and rooted in traditional values. She forced Jake to study classical piano from the age of 5, making him practice for hours every day, forbidding daydreams or rock music. Every note had to be perfect, every piece repeated until mastered like a machine. Jake didn't love Chopin or Bach, but he absorbed something far more vital: patience, music theory, and an ear for structure, elements that would one day make him one of the most emotionally intricate guitarists in metal. Then, at age 12, something seemingly small, but life-altering, happened. One afternoon, Jake heard Jimi Hendrix's Purple Haze coming from his sister's room. The wild, untamed, rule-defying sound awakened something inside him. That night, he quietly took an old guitar from the house, no asking, no permission, and started teaching himself by listening and mimicking. Night after night, while the rest of the family slept, Jake played in the dark, slowly escaping Mozart for Led Zeppelin, Chopin for Ritchie Blackmore, his own silent jailbreak from a world he didn't fit into. There were no teachers, no formal lessons. He learned guitar through method books and ear training, making full use of the music theory drilled into him from years of piano. And in a strange twist of fate, that rigid classical foundation became the very thing that shaped Jake's one-of-a-kind playing. The speed of a shredder, the architecture of a composer, and the emotion of a soul too bruised to cry out. For many, childhood is the start of dreams. For Jake E. Lee, it was where he learned to stay silent, to endure, and most importantly, to turn music into his only refuge. When the world outside turned its back, he didn't scream. He didn't rebel, he just played. And those notes, struck in the darkness of a lonely mixed-race boy's bedroom, would one day carry him to stages he never imagined. But how did a quiet, introverted teenager from San Diego find his way into the heart of heavy metal, surrounded by the loudest, wildest players on the Sunset Strip? And what made Ozzy Osbourne exclaim, "This guy's crazy, and I like it"? Subscribe to the channel and join Jake as he steps out of the shadows and into the spotlight, only to find that the light wasn't meant for everyone. Early career. Jake E. Lee didn't enter the rock world with a bang. There was no sensational debut, no buzzworthy demo, no million-dollar record deal. He started the way he lived, quietly, fiercely, and without waiting for anyone's approval. As a teenager, Jake began playing in local bands around San Diego. There were no grand stages there, just smoke-filled bars and the hum of guitars echoing into the night. But before long, Jake was recognized as the best guitarist in town, known for a playing style that fused restrained emotion with classical music theory in a way no one else could. He once admitted, "I knew I was good, and a lot of people told me the same. But San Diego was too small for a soul burning quietly." In the late 1970s, Jake left home and headed to Los Angeles, the place every young guitarist believed dreams began. But LA wasn't a paradise. It was a ruthless arena, where hundreds of bands and thousands of names trampled over each other for a sliver of recognition. Jake joined Teaser, and later Mickey Rat, the early incarnation of glam metal band Rat. There, he played alongside Stephen Pearcy and Robin Crosby, but tensions soon emerged. Crosby, who started as rhythm guitarist, began demanding to share the lead role, something Jake felt encroached on his space. Still, what drove Jake to walk away wasn't personal conflict. It was the band's motto. Pearcy and the others wanted to pursue what they called fashion rock, all about image, hairspray, flashy pants, and Sunset Strip aesthetics. Jake heard that and flatly said, "That's the dumbest slogan I've ever heard." Then he threw in, "F it, I quit." Jake drifted through LA's music scene, spending time with members of Mötley Crüe and later claiming that Tommy Lee and Nikki Sixx wanted him to replace Mick Mars. Though Nikki would later deny this fiercely, the rumor became one of the most talked-about backstage tales of that era. The turning point came when Jake joined Rough Cut, a band managed by Wendy Dio, wife of Ronnie James Dio. Jake quickly caught Ronnie's eye and was invited to play in Dio's new lineup. But after only 6 weeks, Ronnie realized Jake wasn't a good fit for the European metal sound he envisioned. Jake was replaced by Vivian Campbell and fell into his first dark period. 3 months of drinking, waking up, not knowing where he was. But just when most would have given up, Jake kept going. In 1982, he sent a demo tape and photo to Sharon Osbourne, who was looking for a guitarist to replace Randy Rhoads, the late prodigy killed in a plane crash. When Ozzy was touring in LA, Sharon arranged an audition for Jake, and also invited George Lynch to compete. At the audition, Jake played a spontaneous riff that made the entire room freeze. Ozzy looked at Lynch, then turned to Sharon, pointed at Jake, and said, "That guy's crazy, and I like it." George Lynch was cut on the spot, without even knowing what hit him. Jake E. Lee, once a wandering soul in the LA scene who rejected glam, walked away from Dio and drowned in alcohol, suddenly became Ozzy Osbourne's new guitarist. Not because he fit the trend, not because he looked the part, but because he played with a wild, unhinged energy and never let go of the strings. And so began a new chapter, when Jake stepped into the spotlight, played the riffs that would redefine Ozzy's career, unaware that his own name would soon be erased from the very music he helped create. Career breakthrough. In 1983, when Bark at the Moon was released, Jake E. Lee officially appeared on the global heavy metal map. This wasn't just Ozzy Osbourne's comeback album after the tragic death of Randy Rhoads. It was the record that redefined an entire era's sound, built around a new guitar soul, Jake's. The style of Bark at the Moon was sharper, more modern, less neoclassical than Randy's era, more focused on riffs, complex harmonic structures, and solos that seemed to twist and soar through the air. Jake brought with him a foundation in classical piano from his childhood, fused with the raw energy of American rock, creating a sound that was uniquely his. From Rock and Roll Rebel to Center of Eternity, every track bore his signature, aggressive, yet meticulously controlled. And the title track, Bark at the Moon, was the pinnacle of it all. Jake had written most of the song back when he was with Rough Cut. It was his brainchild, from the iconic opening riff to the offbeat rhythm patterns and the solo that told a story steeped in repressed fury. But after recording all of the guitar parts at Ridge Farm Studios in England, a converted farmhouse turned studio, Jake was handed a contract. The only credited songwriter would be Ozzy Osbourne. No lawyer, no manager, just a cold ultimatum from Sharon Osbourne. If you don't sign this, we'll send you home, hire someone else to record over your parts, and you'll get nothing. Jake had no way out. He signed, took the $15,000 check, and watched his creation bear someone else's name on the cover of the first gold record of his career. Still, Jake didn't quit. He continued touring with Ozzy, bringing his guitar to stages across Europe and America on the Bark at the Moon tour from 1984 to 1985. On stage, he never tried to replace Randy. He didn't dress like him, didn't play like him. Jake built a new identity, quiet, messy-haired, standing in the back, letting his guitar do the screaming. In 1986, when Ozzy returned with The Ultimate Sin, Jake drew a line. He wouldn't play a single note unless he was credited as a songwriter. This time, Sharon agreed. Jake got credit and royalties from ASCAP, though he still wasn't given a share of publishing rights. But to him, recognition mattered more than anything else. The album brought Ozzy closer to mainstream American audiences. Shot in the Dark became a major hit. MTV aired it constantly, and the tour sold out across the country. Jake didn't play to show off. He didn't shred like Eddie Van Halen or flaunt like Yngwie Malmsteen. He played like someone who had been betrayed, precise, restrained, and without a single wasted note. But just as the spotlight was still warm, the next blow struck. And this time, it was even colder. After the Ultimate Sin tour, Sharon invited Jake out for dinner. They talked for hours. Everything seemed normal, no signs of trouble. But once he got home, Jake's guitar tech told him that rumors were flying all over LA. He'd been fired. Jake called Sharon for confirmation. Her response, "Yes, that's why I took you to dinner." No warning, no explanation, no meeting, no press release, just a dinner and a phone call. Jake E. Lee, the man who wrote Bark at the Moon, the one who filled the seemingly unfillable void left by Randy's death, was cut from the band as if he had never been there. His replacement was a 20-year-old newcomer named Zakk Wylde. Jake didn't react. No press conference, no lawsuit. He simply disappeared. But in that darkness, he began planning something few dared to do: to start over, from scratch, with a band that had no name recognition, no management machine, no media leverage, just belief and pride. And the name of that band was Badlands. Setbacks, scandals, rumors. Jake E. Lee was never the kind of artist who needed scandal to survive. He wasn't arrested for drugs, didn't get into backstage brawls, and never made shocking statements just to draw attention. But in the entertainment world, sometimes the most painful blows come not from enemies, but from those you thought were family. For Jake, the deepest wounds came from the very moments that seemed the brightest, and from the relationships that once felt closest. After composing nearly the entire Bark at the Moon album, Jake was handed a contract stating that Ozzy Osbourne would be credited as the sole songwriter. Jake, the man behind those iconic riffs, would receive no credit. When he confronted Sharon Osbourne, she didn't deny the deception. She simply said coldly, "If you don't sign, we'll fly you home. We've got your recordings. We'll hire someone else to redo them. You'll get nothing." Jake knew it was a con, brazen and cruel, but he signed. Not out of weakness, but because he didn't want to be labeled difficult and replaced. He stayed silent to keep touring, to keep playing, and to keep being forgotten in the very music he created. Millions of records were sold. Millions of fans cheered for songs he had crafted, but in every official document, his name was nowhere to be found. The second blow came quieter, but even colder. After the Ultimate Sin tour, Sharon invited Jake to dinner. They talked for hours, nothing about business. But soon after, Jake's guitar tech informed him that rumors were spreading across the Sunset Strip. He had been fired. Jake called Sharon for clarity, and she casually confirmed, "Yes. That's why I took you to dinner. No formal announcement, no farewell. Just a dinner, and an invisible strike-through that erased a man who had once stood beside Ozzy on stage as if he had never existed." In the years that followed, Jake remained surrounded by rumors, some laughable, some cruel. He once mentioned that Tommy Lee and Nikki Sixx of Mötley Crüe had approached him to replace Mick Mars, possibly even forming a two-guitar lineup. Nikki Sixx later vehemently denied the story, calling it fiction. Jake didn't respond. No rebuttal, no drama, just silence as always. He let the words of others pass like an off note, unfixed, unbothered. Still, stories like that kept weaving a fog around him. People called him a mad genius, a has-been, a ghost of the 80s. No one really knew where he was, what he was doing, or whether he was still even playing music. After the death of Ray Gillen, his friend and frontman of Badlands, Jake vanished almost entirely from the music scene. No tours, no albums, no interviews. Rumors took root. Jake was depressed. Jake was addicted. Jake was homeless, selling his guitars to survive. In truth, he lived modestly in a small apartment in Las Vegas, kept a few dogs, and still composed and played music alone, in silence. No addiction. No suicide. He simply no longer wanted to live in the spotlight. In 2014, when he finally spoke publicly about being deceived into signing the Bark at the Moon contract, it wasn't a cry for sympathy or justice. He told the story plainly, like someone finally allowed to speak after years of silence. And the cost of that honesty? An invitation to a Black Sabbath show in Las Vegas was suddenly withdrawn. No official explanation. But Jake knew, and so did the fans. In this industry, truth isn't a virtue, it's a liability. And then in 2024, he was shot 3 times while trying to stop a thief from stealing his neighbor's motorcycle. One bullet hit his arm, another his leg, and the third pierced through his back, fracturing ribs and damaging a lung. He was hospitalized in critical condition, but he survived. When asked if he was angry, Jake just smirked and said, "I've been shot many times in my life. This was just the first with a real gun." From rigged contracts and deceitful dinners to wild rumors and bullets in the dark, Jake never responded with rage. He simply chose silence. But in that silence lay everything the world never truly understood: pride, pain, and a kind of dignity that no one could steal. Not even those who erased his name from the very legend he helped build. Personal life. While most legendary guitarists of the 80s paraded their off-stage lives as extensions of the spotlight, with supermodels, mansions, wild parties, and scandals devoured daily by the press, Jake E. Lee was completely absent from that narrative. No red carpet photos, no tabloid headlines about new girlfriends, no pictures of children, no interviews about love. His entire life seemed locked inside a private room, one with no space for scrutiny and no need for anyone's validation. Jake has never been married, has no children, and has never publicly confirmed any long-term romantic relationship. At one point, he lived with a woman struggling with addiction, a relationship he once described as a solitary battle to save someone who was sinking. He spent a year trying to help her recover, taking her to rehab, offering encouragement, and waiting patiently. But when love couldn't win over addiction, they parted quietly. A few years later, she died from an overdose. Jake never said much about it. In one rare interview, he simply stated, "I tried. But there are some things no one can save." After that heartbreak, Jake chose to live alone in a small apartment on the outskirts of Las Vegas, far from the chaos in the only place that seemed to bring him peace. No fans loitering outside, no paparazzi, no glamorous invitations, just his dogs, a few guitars hanging silently on the walls, an old amp and a kitchen that served its purpose. He once said, "I don't like crowds. I don't fit into this idea of networking in the entertainment industry. I just want to live." Some fans lamented that Jake had isolated himself from the fame he rightfully deserved. But to Jake, it wasn't withdrawal. It was a choice. He didn't need a stage to prove who he was. After all the betrayals, by the Osbournes, record labels, even former bandmates, Jake understood one thing: the closer you get to the light, the more likely you are to get burned, and he no longer had any interest in meaningless flames. During his long absence, rumors swirled. Some claimed he was addicted. Others said he'd gone broke. A few insisted he was homeless. But Jake lived, modestly, quietly, and sufficiently. Not lavishly, not publicly, but enough. He wrote music when inspired, repaired guitars when the world was quiet, played solos no one would ever hear, at 2 a.m., when there were no applause and no judgment. To him, that was real music, the kind that didn't need to prove anything. And if there's one long-term relationship in Jake's life, it's been with his guitar. He cares for his instruments the way others care for a partner, cleaning them meticulously, tuning with precision, replacing strings regularly. Some guitars he's kept for over 30 years, their wood cracked and paint peeling, but he's never thought of selling them. Just like himself, aged, out of fashion, but never untrue. Perhaps that's why Jake chose solitude, not because no one wanted him, but because he didn't need anything half-hearted. He didn't need to be loved in the way the market defines it. He just needed to be free, on his own terms. And in a world drowning in noise, that silence was his loudest declaration. Legacy and influence. If you search for Jake E. Lee in the Hall of Fame, you might be disappointed. There's no bronze statue, no star on the Walk of Fame, no title of greatest guitarist of all time in Rolling Stone or Billboard rankings. But ask any real guitarist, Dimebag Darrell, John Five, Nuno Bettencourt, even Zakk Wylde, and they'll tell you something undeniable. Jake E. Lee is a guitarist musicians truly respect, not because he's famous, but because he's honest. In an era where speed and technique were worshipped like scripture, Jake chose to play differently. He didn't run scales to prove he was faster. He didn't shred to show off. Every riff, every bend, every phrasing he played had breath, emotion, and its own story. Jake's music was like an internal monologue, not flashy, not rushed, but something that made the listener stop and really listen, not because it demanded attention, but because it was real. Bark at the Moon is the clearest testament to Jake's strange and powerful legacy. Even though his name was erased from the writing credits, loyal fans knew the soul of that album didn't lie in Ozzy's manic vocals. It lived in those razor-sharp, conflicted, emotionally charged guitar lines, written and performed by the man standing in the shadows. Songs like Rock and Roll Rebel, Center of Eternity, and especially Bark at the Moon would not exist as we know them without Jake E. Lee. With The Ultimate Sin, Jake proved he wasn't just a hired hand, but a true composer. This was the first album where he was credited as a writer, and the change was immediate and obvious. Richer harmonies, tighter structures, solos that led the listener rather than simply exploding on cue. That shift wasn't accidental. It was Jake's fingerprint. And with Badlands, he stepped out from Ozzy's shadow to build an entirely different world. Nostalgic, blues-soaked, and emotionally deep. Though it didn't succeed commercially, Badlands' debut album is now considered one of the most underrated hard rock records of the late 80s and early 90s. Many critics place it alongside Led Zeppelin IV or Appetite for Destruction in terms of structure, cohesion, and raw emotion. But unlike Zeppelin or Guns N' Roses, Badlands never got the chance to become legendary because they were forgotten before they were ever understood. Just like Jake himself, Jake's legacy isn't in numbers. It's in the quiet, lasting influence. It's in the way a generation of guitarists learned to phrase, using the space between notes to tell a story. It's in the humility he brought to the guitar, treating it not as a tool for showing off, but as an inseparable part of the body. And it's in the silent acknowledgement from real players everywhere. No one played like Jake E. Lee, and no one ever will. For some, that may not be enough to make it into the history books. But for those who've sat in front of an amp at midnight, trying to play the riff from Bark at the Moon or Dreams in the Dark, just to capture a glimpse of the soul Jake put into it, that legacy can never be forgotten. No spotlight needed, no praise required, just a single guitar tone that makes the world go quiet. That's enough to be immortal. Current life. After years of living in the shadows of the very world he once helped ignite, Jake E. Lee unexpectedly made headlines in October 2024. Not for a new album, a grand tour, or a historic reunion, but because he had been shot. The incident took place early one morning in Las Vegas, where Jake was walking his dogs through his quiet neighborhood, a simple routine he had followed for years. That day, he encountered a group of masked individuals attempting to steal a neighbor's motorcycle. He didn't shout. He didn't try to be a hero. He simply walked up and asked them to stop. In a flash, one of them pulled out a gun. 3 shots rang out. One pierced his arm, one struck his leg, and one hit his back, fracturing ribs and damaging a lung. Jake was rushed to the ICU, conscious but in critical condition. Fortunately, none of the bullets hit vital organs. And as he had so many times before, Jake survived, not by luck, but by the survival instincts honed over decades of injustice, isolation, and pain. When asked if he felt angry, Jake replied quietly, "I've been shot many times in my life. This was just the first time it was with a real gun." During his recovery, doctors discovered that he wasn't suffering from carpal tunnel syndrome, as previously diagnosed, but something far worse. Cartilage loss in his right hand. Every movement on the guitar now caused pain, like a blade slicing into the joints. A typical person might choose surgery. Jake did not. He chose instead to relearn how to play, adjusting angles with his elbow, controlling finger pressure, altering technique, and coexisting with the pain. Not for a performance, just to keep playing. Around the same time, Jake expressed his desire to complete the Patina tour with his band Red Dragon Cartel, a tour that had been postponed since 2020 due to the COVID-19 pandemic and further delayed by his hand injury. As of mid-2025, no official dates have been announced, but he continues to practice regularly, slowly working his way back to the stage. At 67, after surviving a near-fatal shooting, Jake still chooses to return. Not with fanfare, not with media campaigns, but with a guitar and an unbreakable will. In a world where most of his contemporaries have either faded away or desperately cling to the spotlight, Jake continues to live his own way. No social media, no images, no promotion. He's still in Las Vegas, still walking his dogs, still caring for his guitars, still playing songs that may never be heard, but that he knows the meaning of all too well. To Jake, music was never a job or a career tool. It was a means of survival. And even if the world forgets his name 1,000 times over, as long as someone strums a riff from Bark at the Moon, he's still there. Not needing the spotlight, not chasing medals, just needing to play. Jake E. Lee was never loud, and he was never the kind of artist who knew how to sell himself to the times. He never sought sympathy, nor did he wait to be honored. The only thing he has held onto to this day is the quiet resilience of someone who refused to bend, whether under neglect, injury, or the very industry that once devoured him and then pretended not to know his name. Some artists are celebrated with statues while they're still alive. Others are forever relegated to footnotes in the history of rock. Jake E. Lee exists somewhere in between. Not a glorified legend, but impossible to erase from the memories of those who've truly heard him play. He didn't leave behind many words, but he left behind sound. He never stepped up to accept awards, but he walked through the darkest days without losing himself. And sometimes, it's that kind of quiet, unwavering existence that makes an artist truly immortal. If you've ever felt that the world forgets artists like Jake E. Lee, those who aren't loud, who don't perform for attention, but who stay true to their music, leave a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. What riff, what song, what moment made you remember Jake? And if you believe these quiet stories deserve to be heard, hit subscribe to Rock Discovery, where we continue exploring the legends who never needed a spotlight, yet still lit up an entire generation.